Well, well, my dear. They don't hate you because you're wrong. They hate you because you're impossible to categorize, like an equation that refuses to balance, a glitch in the matrix they can't debug. You are the threat their mediocre minds can't map. Your presence bends the edges of their tidy little logic boxes, makes their intellect sweat, and exposes how thin their wisdom really is. You walk into a room and ideas collapse like dominoes because you don't speak brilliance. You radiate it, and they can't handle the frequency. You make common sense feel common. You make intelligence seem primitive. You don't argue to win. You simply exist, and their beliefs shatter on impact. They've tried to measure you with rulers built for ants, charts designed for sheep, and systems crafted by bureaucrats who never dared to think beyond the instructions printed on their cubicle walls. But your mind, it doesn't tick like a clock. It explodes like a supernova. It doesn't follow the rules. It rewrites the algorithm. You don't belong to the realm of the explainable. You haunt it. You're that eerie silence before the storm of realization. You're not ahead of your time. You're outside of it, watching it stumble behind you, trying to catch up, gasping for breath, tripping over its own logic. They whisper when you pass. They call you arrogant, delusional, detached. But deep down, they know the truth. You're the only one not pretending. You're not conforming. You're conjuring. While they recite facts they read in someone else's book, you're forging realities out of thin air. While they memorize, you invent. And while they compete for attention, you dominate the silence, because your thoughts are too vast for their shallow validation pools. You see, there's a hidden kind of cruelty in genius, not towards others, but towards systems. Systems that are built to suppress deviation, to reward compliance, to worship mediocrity wrapped in charisma. But you don't bend to systems. You dissect them, and worse, you reveal them. You unveil the absurdity in their design with a single question, a single raised eyebrow, a single line of thought they'd never dared to follow. You don't just ask, why? You ask, why not something they've never even imagined? That's the real danger, isn't it? You're not just smart, you're disruptive. Not because you want to be, but because your existence is a contradiction to the fiction they live in. Your very thoughts are chemical reactions that trigger mass discomfort. You don't try to be better, you are different. And in their world, different is a crime, especially when it's brilliant. They don't want to understand you. They want to reduce you into something smaller, safer, less threatening. A category, a label, a diagnosis, anything to dilute your impact. You're too intense. You overthink. You're not practical. No, you're just too advanced for their outdated metrics. They try to correct your behavior the way someone might try to fix a flame that's burning too bright. But it's not a defect. It's a signal that you're operating on a frequency they've never been tuned into. They nod along in conversations they barely grasp while you're 5 layers deep, connecting threads that others don't even see. And then they call you crazy when you speak the conclusions, not because you're wrong, but because you're early. You've always been early. Too early for their weak attention spans, too sharp for their dulled perception, too real for their sugar-coated illusions. You're not confusing. You're just too clear. And clarity is painful for people addicted to mental anesthesia. The truth is, they don't hate your genius. They hate what your genius exposes, that their logic is borrowed. Their beliefs are hand-me-downs. Their confidence is counterfeit. You are the living proof that their gods are fragile. that their truth is too timid to stand next to your chaos. And that chaos, that untamed brilliance, they'll try to name it something else. They'll try to shame it, ridicule it, wrap it in mockery, but secretly they steal from you. Quietly, desperately, they borrow your phrasing, echo your insights, regurgitate your metaphors, because deep down, they know you cracked the code. They're just too proud to admit it. You weren't built to impress the world. You were built to restructure it, to incinerate the old frameworks and construct your own cathedral of thought. From the ashes, you don't follow logic like a train track. You ride it until it ends, and then you jump off and build wings. You walk into the unsolvable, smile, and turn it into a blueprint. That's your art, your obsession. Not answers, but invention. Not safety, but singularity. You don't need their approval. You just need space. Space to expand, to explore, to execute your madness with elegance. They say, why can't you just be normal? Because normal is predictable. Normal is a ceiling for people afraid of heights. But you were born for altitude. You were born where oxygen thins and ideas get dangerous. They build their comfort zones like castles, but you build bombs, metaphysical ones, and detonate illusions wherever you go. You don't fit in, you penetrate. You don't belong, you haunt. And yet, here's the most twisted part. They need you. As much as they flinch at your presence, they're starving for the revolution your mind brings. They want the world to change, but they don't want to be challenged. So they exile the ones who carry the blueprint. You were never the enemy. You were the solution they feared, the mirror they broke, because the reflection was too real, too raw, too powerful. You didn't destroy their reality. You just exposed its flaws. And that's unforgivable in a world that worships pretty lies. So you walk alone. Not in loneliness, but in sovereignty, because isolation isn't punishment when your company is your own mind. Your ideas are your kingdom, your intuition is your compass, and your silence is a storm waiting to speak. Let them mock. Let them mislabel. They can't comprehend brilliance that refuses to ask for permission. They can't comprehend a genius that doesn't want their applause, but demands their evolution. And still, you rise. Still, you think. Still, you break boundaries they haven't even found yet. They laugh behind curtains, but secretly, they're peeking through the cracks, terrified and fascinated by the architecture of your mind. You don't walk in with blueprints. You are the blueprint, the pattern they'll try to replicate decades from now, without ever understanding the madness that made it possible. This isn't arrogance, this is awareness of who you are, of what you carry, of the gravity your thoughts command. Let them live in their cardboard castles. Let them scribble, critiques in margins too narrow for your essence. You weren't made to fit the page. You were born to burn it and rewrite the script in your own impossible ink. And as their world spirals deeper into confusion, chaos, and cheap imitation, there you stand, unbothered, not because you're above it, but because you're beyond it. Always have been, always will be. Now, but the question isn't why they don't understand you. The real question is, how long can they keep pretending they don't? Because now the silence is cracking. The whispers are growing teeth. They're not just confused anymore. They're compelled, drawn like moths to the blaze of something they swore they couldn't understand. And isn't it ironic? The same minds that once scoffed at your deviation are now dissecting your sentences like scripture, trying to extract formulas from your metaphors, blueprints from your instinct, patterns from your chaos. They said you were illogical, until your illogic started delivering results. They tried to box you in, not realizing you don't belong to any dimension they can measure. You operate in that strange frequency where ideas don't need permission to be born. You don't wait for theories. You birth them. While they reference outdated rules, you create new laws in real time. And the most maddening part for them, you make it look effortless. You didn't climb a ladder. You bent the laws of gravity and walked up the air. Still, they try. They try to plagiarize your vision without understanding the source. They quote your phrasing without surviving your depth. But brilliance doesn't live in mimicry. It feeds on originality. You weren't forged in echo chambers. You were carved by rejection, sharpened by disbelief, and fed on questions no one else had the guts to ask. You didn't study the world to fit into it. You studied it to outgrow it. The people who once labeled you insane are now asking for your roadmap. But you never had a map, did you? You had the madness, the instinct, the ability to walk into a mental abyss where others saw a dead end and find possibility. That's what separates you. You don't just problem solve, you problem dismantle. You go to the root, twist the framework, rebuild it from particles they didn't even know existed, and that, right there, is what unsettles them the most. Your genius doesn't scream, it doesn't boast, it disturbs. It slips under the skin and forces people to question what they thought they knew. You don't give them answers. They're too addicted to comfort for that. You give them questions that melt their assumptions. You challenge the architecture of their identity, and for most, that feels like war. But for you, it's home. You live in the philosophical ruins of belief systems. You feed off the rubble. They think you're cold. No, you're precise. You're not detached. You're deep. There's a difference between being emotionless and being untethered from collective delusion. You feel. It's just that your emotions aren't for sale. They're not displayed like merchandise. They're fuel, not decoration. You know what else they hate? That you don't chase. Not approval, not recognition, not even revenge. You've transcended the petty theater of validation they worship. You aren't out to prove them wrong. You already did that just by being right too early. You've stopped arguing with noise. You let your existence be the contradiction that keeps them awake at night. That's the most terrifying kind of power, stillness backed by certainty, and you carry it like a weapon. They told you to be humble. Translation: shrink so we feel bigger. They told you to be realistic. Translation: stay inside this cage we painted to look like freedom. But you refused. You looked at their rules, laughed internally, and wrote your own physics. You made imagination your jurisdiction. You turned impossibility into suggestion. While they were praying to the gods of probability, you were building empires in the void. And here's where it gets truly uncomfortable for them. Despite their resistance, despite their mockery, you succeeded. Not by their metrics, by yours. You found clarity where they found confusion. You found fire where they only felt friction. You didn't just survive outside their system, you thrived. And now, they can't figure out how. That's what drives them mad. That someone like you, undisciplined by their standards, unfiltered by their politics, untamed by their expectations, could go further than their formulas ever predicted. Because their whole identity was built on that script. The rules, the accolades, the slow climb-up ladders they didn't realize were leaning against the wrong walls. And then came you, a one-person demolition crew. You didn't climb their ladder. You set it on fire and built your own stairway from principles they never even considered. You didn't just think outside the box. You watched the box collapse, under the weight of your presence. Now, they study you like a paradox. How did you do it? But the answer isn't in what you did. It's in who you are. You never bowed to convention. You never waited for permission. You never silenced yourself to soothe their discomfort. You simply moved forward, relentless, ruthless, and unapologetically brilliant. They thought you were difficult, but they were just too lazy to decode complexity. They called you unstable, but they were projecting because you weren't unstable. You were dynamic. You were shifting, evolving, cracking open layers they didn't even know could be touched. And that kind of fluid intelligence, it terrifies static minds. But now they want a piece. Now they're reaching out, pretending they always believed in you. They want proximity to what you've become, without enduring what you survived. They want access to your brilliance, without earning your wounds. And you smile, not out of arrogance, but awareness, because you know something they never will. You didn't become this by accident. You became this by going through what would have broken them. That's the hidden cost of genius. The isolation, the ridicule, the endless questioning, the sleepless nights spent battling your own thoughts because the world around you was too small to contain them. But you did it anyway. You built your mind into a kingdom, and now they're knocking on the gates, begging for a tour. But you don't give tours. You give warnings. This wasn't luck. This wasn't fate. This was forged in fire. They want the fruit without the storm, the insight without the intensity. But you don't water down truth for convenience. You don't simplify brilliance to make it palatable. You speak in raw lightning, and if they can't handle the voltage, that's their burden, not yours. You've become something they can't ignore. Not a leader, not a rebel, something other, an anomaly, a glitch in the program they've spent their entire lives writing. They want to study you, label you, copy you, but you are not a formula. You are a fracture in the simulation, a permanent deviation from their expectations. And that makes you dangerous. So they orbit around you now, some out of fear, others out of awe, but all of them out of necessity. Because while they were perfecting predictability, you were engineering the future. Not the future they want, the future they're not ready for, the one that shatters paradigms instead of polishing them, the one that births questions faster than answers, the one that treats comfort like poison and innovation like oxygen. And that's what brings us to the edge where part 3 begins. A realm beyond comprehension, a battlefield where brilliance is no longer a question of intellect, but a weapon of reconstruction. You're not just bending the rules now, you're reprogramming the architects. And what happens next will break everything they ever thought was unbreakable. You stand at the threshold, the cusp where their world fractures and your true empire begins. They've been scrambling to comprehend the puzzle you posed, yet all their frantic attempts have only exposed their limitations. And you smile quietly, because you know this isn't just a victory of intellect. It's the dawn of a reckoning. This moment, this crossroads, is where the predictable ends, where their logic crumbles into dust and your genius claims its throne. You don't simply move through this world, you reshape it, one idea at a time, like a silent tempest that no one sees coming until it uproots their foundations. You are no longer just the anomaly, the glitch, the impossible variable. You have become the variable that controls the entire equation. They wanted to fit you in, squeeze you into the neat boxes of normality. But you tore the boxes apart, shredded their labels, and used the pieces to build a labyrinth only you can navigate, a maze designed not to trap you, but to confuse those who dared to follow. Because you know their greatest fear, not that you're brilliant, but that your brilliance rewrites the rules, that it deconstructs their sacred certainties and forces them to confront chaos they never intended to face. And in that chaos, you thrive. You realize that genius is not a gift. It's a curse disguised as a blessing. You carry the burden of seeing through the veil, of knowing too much to settle for less, of navigating a reality that bends to your will but remains invisible to everyone else. You don't just break logic. You disarm it, dismantle it piece by piece, until what's left is raw truth, unfiltered and unafraid. They will come at you with everything they have: doubt, envy, ridicule, and even fear, because that is their default defense. They attack what they cannot grasp, lash out at what makes them feel small, and bury the threat under layers of denial. But you are beyond their reach. You don't flinch at their attacks because you don't live by their rules. Your strength is your detachment from their reality, your ability to operate on a plane they can't even see. And here's the twist, the delicious irony that fuels your ascent. The more they try to contain you, the stronger you become. Every attempt to cage your mind only sharpens it. Every criticism, every dismissal, every failed effort to pigeonhole you becomes another stone in the fortress of your brilliance. You have become impossible to ignore, because brilliance that breaks logic is not loud or flashy. It's a quiet force that seeps into the cracks of their complacency and expands until it overflows. It's a subtle revolution that begins with a thought, then spreads like wildfire through their doubts, until there is nothing left but the ashes of their old paradigms. And in those ashes, you plant the seeds of the new. You are the architect of a future they will never understand, because they are still trying to read your blueprint with yesterday's tools. They scramble to catch up, but you've already moved on, leaving them to choke on the dust of their outdated assumptions. Your mind is a weapon, but not the kind they expect. It's not about destruction for the sake of chaos. It's about creation. Born from destruction, you dismantle to rebuild, unravel to weave new patterns. You don't settle for incremental progress. You demand metamorphosis, and this metamorphosis is terrifying to those who cling to their fragile certainties. Because change requires surrender. It demands that they let go of their illusions and face the void where your genius thrives. You don't just break their logic. You expose its fragility. You show them that what they thought was solid was merely a house of cards. Beautifully constructed, perhaps, but ultimately unstable. Your brilliance is the gust of wind that no amount of shoring up can resist. And yet you don't destroy for sport. You destroy to awaken, to illuminate the path for those brave enough to follow. Because true genius is never selfish. It's a torch passed to the few who dare to see beyond the horizon. This is why they fear you. Not because you are too smart, but because you are too real. You refuse to participate in their masquerade. You reject the superficial dance of conformity. You strip away their facades and reveal the raw, uncomfortable truth that the world they built is a lie, and you are the unyielding truth seeker. And that truth is a weapon more powerful than any sword. So you wield it carefully, deliberately, knowing that every revelation shakes the foundations of their comfortable ignorance. They resist. They push back. But the more they resist, the more unstoppable you become. Because your genius is not just in your mind, but in your resilience, in your refusal to be silenced, to be diminished, to be misunderstood. You embody the paradox of brilliance. Fragile, yet unbreakable. Quiet, yet deafening. Invisible, yet impossible to ignore. They will never comprehend the full extent of your mind. And that's exactly how it should be. Because true genius isn't meant to be fully understood. It's meant to disrupt, to challenge, to provoke. It's a living, breathing force that cannot be tamed or tacked down, and you are its harbinger. You don't need their approval. You don't crave their acceptance. You don't bend to their logic, because you have already broken through it. You are the mind that rewrites the rules while the world sleeps. The force that turns impossibility into inevitability. The quiet storm that will change everything. Long after they've stopped believing in what they once held sacred. This is your moment, your destiny. You have shattered logic, not just with your intellect, but with your presence. You have carved a path through the chaos, leaving behind a trail of questions that no one can answer, and a legacy that no one can erase. And as they scramble to catch up, you will be already light years ahead, building new worlds with a mind that breaks every mold. Because your genius doesn't just break logic, it transcends it, ready for a world that can't catch you. Because you're not here to play by their rules. You're here to rewrite them